双语音标领航，注音阅读启蒙，叶兴阳有声读物。
A Lady's Life in the Rocky Mountains by Isabella L. Bird. To my sister, to whom these letters were originally written, they are now affectionately dedicated. Contents. Letter I. Lake Tahoe morning in San Francisco dust A, Pacific mail train digger Indians Cape, Horn A mountain, Hotel A pioneer A, truckee livery stable A mountain stream finding a bear Tahoe. Letter 2. A lady's get up. Grizzly bears the gem of the Sierras, a tragic tale A carnival of color. Letter 3. A temple of Morpheus Utah A, God forgotten, town A, distressed couple dog villages A, temperance colony A, Colorado in, the bug pest Fort Collins. Letter 4. A plague of flies A, melancholy charioteer the foot hills A, mountain boarding house A, dull life, being agreeable, climate of Colorado soroche and snakes. Letter V. A dateless day, those hands of yours, a Puritan persevering shiftlessness the house mother family worship A, grim Sunday A, thick-skulled Englishman, a morning call another atmosphere the great lone land, ill-found, a log camp bad footing for horses accidents disappointment. Letter 6. A Bronco Marin accident wonderland A sad story the children of the territories hard greed halcyon hour smartness, old-fashioned prejudices the Chicago colony good luck 3 notes of admiration A, good horse the St. Vrain the Rocky Mountains at last, Mountain Jim, a death Augustus Park. Letter 7. Personality of Long's Peak, Mountain Jim, Lake of the Lilies A silent forest the camping ground, Ring, a lady's bower dawn and sunrise A glorious view links of diamonds the scent of the peak the dogs lift, suffering from thirst the descent the bivouac. Letter 8. Estes Park big game, parks in Colorado magnificent scenery flowers and pines an awful road our log cabin Griffith Evans A miniature world our topics A night alarm A skunk morning glories daily routine the panic, wait for the wagon, a musical evening. Letter 9. Please ma'ams. A desperado A cattle hunt the muster A mad cow A snowstorm snowed up birdie the plains A prairie schooner Denver A fine Plum Creek, being agreeable, snowbound the gray mare. Letter X. A white world bad traveling A millionaires home Pleasant Park Perry's park stock raising A cattle king the Arkansas divide birdies sagacity luxury monument park deference to prejudice A death seen the Manitou A loose shoe the Ute Pass Bergen's Park A, settlers home Hayden's divide sharp criticism speaking the truth. Letter 11. Tarryall Creek the Red Range Excelsior Importunate Pedlas Snow and Heat A, Bison Calf Deep Drift South Park the Great Divide Comanche Bill Difficulties, Hall's Gulch A, Lord Dundreary Ridiculous Fears. Letter 12. Deer Valley Lynch Law Vigilance Committees the Silver Spruce Taste and Abstinence the Whiskey Fiend Smartness Turkey Creek Canyon the Indian Problem Public Rascality Friendly Meetings the Way to the Golden City A, Rising Settlement Clear Creek Canyon Staging Swearing A, Mountain Town. Letter 13. The Blight of Mining Green Lake Golden City Benighted Vertigo Boulder Canyon Financial Straits A, Hard Ride the Last Cent A Bachelor's Home, Mountain Gym. A surprise A night arrival making the best of its scanty fare. Letter 14. A dismal ride A desperado's tale. Lost. 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 Winter glory solitude hard times intense cold A pack of wolves the beaver dams ghastly scenes venison stakes our evenings. Letter 15. A whiskey slave the pleasures of monotony the mountain lion. Another mouth to feed. A tiresome boy and outcast Thanksgiving Day the newcomer A, literary humbug, milking a dry cow route fishing A, snowstorm A, desperado's den. Letter 16. A harmonious home intense cold A, purple sun A, grim jest A, perilous ride frozen eyelids long mouth the pathless prairie, hardships of emigrant life A, trapper's advice the little Thompson Evans and Jim. Letter 17. Woman's mission the last morning crossing the St. Vrain Miller the St. Vrain again crossing the prairie. Jim's dream. Keeping strangers. The in kitchen A reputed child eater notoriety A quiet dance. Jim's resolve the frost fallen unfortunate introduction. Letter I. Lake Tahoe morning in San Francisco dust A, Pacific mail train digger Indians Cape, Horn A mountain, Hotel A pioneer A truckee livery stable A mountain stream finding a bear Tahoe. Lake Tahoe. September 2nd. I have found a dream of beauty at which one might look all one's life and sigh. Not lovable. like the Sandwich Islands, but beautiful in its own way. A strictly North American beauty, snow-splotched mountains, huge pines, redwoods, sugar pines, silver spruce, a crystalline atmosphere, waves of the richest color, and a pine-hung lake which mirrors all beauty on its surface. Lake Tahoe is before me, a sheet of water 22 miles long by 10 broad, and in some places 700 feet deep. It lies at a height of 6,000 feet, and the snow-crowned summits which wall it in are from 8,000 to 11,000 feet in altitude. The air is keen and elastic. There is no sound but the distant and slightly musical ring of the lumber's axe. It is a weariness to go back, even in thought, to the clang of San Francisco, which I left in its cold morning fog early yesterday, driving to the Oakland Ferry through streets with sidewalks heaped with thousands of cantaloupe and watermelons, tomatoes, cucumbers, squashes, pears, grapes, peaches, apricots, all of startling size as compared with any I ever saw before. Other streets were piled with sacks of flour, left out all night, owing to the security from rain at this season. I pass hastily over the early part of the journey, the crossing the bay in a fog as chill as November. The number of lunch baskets, which gave the car the look of conveying a great picnic party, the last view of the Pacific, on which I had looked for nearly a year, the fierce sunshine and brilliant sky inland, the look of long ranlessness, which one may not call drought, the valleys with sides crimson with the poison oak, the dusty vineyards, with great purple clusters thick among the leaves, and between the vines great dusty melons lying on the dusty earth. From off the boundless harvest fields the grain was carried in June, and it is now stacked in sacks along the track, awaiting freightage. California is a land flowing with milk and honey. The barns are bursting with fullness. In the dusty orchards the apple and pear branches are supported, that they may not break down under the weight of fruit. Melons, tomatoes, and squashes of gigantic size lie almost unheeded on the ground. Fat cattle, gorged almost to repletion, shade themselves under the oaks. Superb red horses shine, not with grooming, but with condition. And thriving farms everywhere show on what a solid basis the prosperity of the Golden State is founded. Very uninviting, however rich, was the blazing Sacramento Valley, and very repulsive the city of Sacramento, which, at a distance of 125 miles from the Pacific, has an elevation of only 30 feet. The mercury stood at 103 degrees in the shade, and the fine white dust was stifling. In the late afternoon we began the ascent of the Sierras, whose saw-like points had been in sight for many miles. The dusty fertility was all left behind. The country became rocky and gravelly, and deeply scored by streams bearing the muddy wash of the mountain gold mines down to the muddier Sacramento. There were long broken ridges and deep ravines, the ridges becoming longer, the ravines deeper, the pines thicker and larger. As we ascended into a cool atmosphere of exquisite purity, and before 6 p.m. the last traces of cultivation and the last hardwood trees were left behind. One in consequence of the unobserved omission of a date to my letters having been pointed out to me. I take this opportunity of stating that I traveled in Colorado in the autumn and early winter of 1873, on my way to England from the Sandwich Islands. The letters are a faithful picture of the country and state of society as it then was. But friends who have returned from the West within the last 6 months tell me that things are rapidly changing, that the frame house is replacing the log cabin, and that the footprints of elk and bighorn may be sought for in vain on the dewy slopes of Estes Park. I.L.B. Author's Note to the Third Edition, January 16, 1880. At Colfax, a station at a height of 400 feet, I got out and walked the length of the train. First came 2 great gaudy engines, the Grizzly Bear and the White Fox, with their respective tenders loaded with logs of wood, the engines with great, solitary, reflecting lamps in front above the cow guards, a quantity of polished brasswork, comfortable glass houses, and well-stuffed seats for the engine drivers. The engines and tenders were succeeded by a baggage car, the latter loaded with bullion and valuable parcels, and in charge of 2 express agents. Each of these cars is 45 feet long. Then came 2 cars loaded with peaches and grapes. Then 2 Silver Palace cars, each 60 feet long. Then a smoking car, at that time occupied mainly by Chinamen. And then 5 ordinary passenger cars, with platforms like all the others, making altogether a train about 700 feet in length. The platforms of the 4 front cars were clustered over with Digger Indians, with their squaws, children, and gear. They are perfect savages, without any aptitude for even aboriginal civilization, and are altogether the most degraded of the ill-fated tribes which are dying out before the white races. They were all very diminutive, 5 feet 1 inch being, I should think, about the average height, with flat noses, wide mouths, and black hair, cut straight above the eyes and hanging lank and long at the back and sides. The squaws wore their hair thickly plastered with pitch, and a broad band of the same across their noses and cheeks. They carried their infants on their backs, strapped to boards. The clothing of both sexes was a ragged, dirty combination of coarse woolen cloth and hide, the moccasins being unornamented. They were all hideous and filthy, and swarming with vermin. The men carried short bows and arrows. One of them, who appeared to be the chief, having a lynx's skin for a quiver. A few had fishing tackle, but the bystanders said that they lived almost entirely upon grasshoppers. They were a most impressive incongruity in the midst of the tokens of an omnipotent civilization. The light of the sinking sun from that time glorified the Sierras, and as the dew fell, aromatic odors made the still air sweet. On a single track, sometimes carried on a narrow ledge excavated from the mountainside by men lowered from the top in baskets, overhanging ravines from 2,000 to 3,000 feet deep, the monster train snaked its way upwards, stopping sometimes in front of a few frame houses, at others where nothing was to be seen but a log cabin with a few Chinamen hanging about it, but where trails on the sides of the ravines pointed to a gold country above and below. So sharp and frequent are the curves on some parts of the ascent, that on looking out of the window one could seldom see more than a part of the train at once. At Cape Horn, where the track curves round the ledge of a precipice 500 feet in depth, it is correct to be frightened, and a fashion of holding the breath and shutting the eyes prevails. But my fears were reserved for the crossing of a trestle bridge over a very deep chasm, which is itself approached by a sharp curve. This bridge appeared to be overlapped by the cars, so as to produce the effect of looking down directly into a wild gulch, with a torrent raging along it at an immense depth below. Shivering in the keen, frosty air near the summit pass of the Sierras, we entered the snow sheds, wooden galleries, which for about 50 miles shut out all the splendid views of the region, as given in dioramas, not even allowing a glimpse of the gem of the Sierras, the lovely Donner Lake. One of these sheds is 27 miles long. In a few hours the mercury had fallen from 103 degrees to 29 degrees, and we had ascended 987 feet in 105 miles. After passing through the sheds, we had several grand views of a pine forest on fire before reaching Truckee at 11 p.m. having traveled 258 miles. Truckee, the center of the lumbering region of the Sierras, is usually spoken of as Rough Mountain Town, and Mr. W. had told me that all the roughs of the district congregated there, that there were nightly pistol affrays in barrooms, etc. But as he admitted that a lady was sure of respect, and Mr. G. strongly advised me to stay and see the lakes, I got out, much dazed, and very stupid with sleep, envying the people in the sleeping car, who were already unconscious on their luxurious couches. The cars drew up in a street that could be called, which was only a wide, cleared space, intersected by rails, with here and there a stump, and great piles of sawn logs bulking big in the moonlight, and a number of irregular clapboard, steep-roofed houses, many of them with open fronts, glaring with light and crowded with men. We had pulled up at the door of a rough Western hotel, with a partially open front, being a barroom crowded with men drinking and smoking, and the space between it and the cars was a moving mass of loafers and passengers. On the tracks, engines, tolling heavy bells, were mightily moving, the glare from their cyclopean eyes dulling the light of a forest which was burning fitfully on a mountainside. And on open spaces great fires of pine logs were burning cheerily, with groups of men round them. A band was playing noisily, and the unholy sound of tom-toms was not far off. Mountains, the sierras of many a fireside dream seemed to wall in the town, and great pines stood out, sharp and clear-cut, against a sky in which a moon and stars were shining frostily. It was a sharp frost at that great height, and when an irrepressible rigor, who seemed to represent the hotel establishment, deposited me and my carpet-bag in a room which answered for the parlor, I was glad to find some remains of pine knots still alight in the stove. A man came in and said that when the cars were gone, he would try to get me a room. But they were so full that it would be a very poor one. The crowd was solely masculine. It was then 11:30 p.m., and I had not had a meal since 6 a.m., but when I asked hopefully for a hot supper, with tea, I was told that no supper could be got at that hour. But in half an hour the same man returned with a small cup of cold, weak tea, and a small slice of bread, which looked as if it had been much handled. I asked the Negro factotum about the hire of horses, and presently a man came in from the bar who, he said, could supply my needs. This man, the very type of a Western pioneer, bowed, threw himself into a rocking chair, drew a spittoon beside him, cut a fresh quid of tobacco, began to chew energetically, and put his feet, cased in miry high boots, into which his trousers were tucked, on the top of the stove. He said he had horses which would both lope and trot, that some ladies preferred the Mexican saddle, that I could ride alone in perfect safety, and after a route had been devised, I hired a horse for 2 days. This man wore a pioneer's badge as one of the earliest settlers of California, but he had moved on as one place after another had become too civilized for him. But nothing, he added, was likely to change much in Truckee. I was afterwards told that the usual regular hours of sleep are not observed there. The accommodation is too limited for the population of 2,002, which is masculine mainly, and is liable to frequent temporary additions, and beds are occupied continuously, though by different occupants, throughout the greater part of the 24 hours. Consequently, I found the bed and room allotted to me quite tumbled-looking. Men's coats and sticks were hanging up, miry boots were littered about, and a rifle was in one corner. There was no window to the outer air, but I slept soundly, being only once awoke by an increase of the same din in which I had fallen asleep, varied by 3 pistol shots fired in rapid succession. 2 Nelson's Guide to the Central Pacific Railroad. This morning Truckee wore a totally different aspect. The crowds of the night before had disappeared. There were heaps of ashes where the fires had been. A sleepy German waiter seemed the only person about the premises. The open drinking saloons were nearly empty, and only a few sleepy-looking loafers hung about in what is called the street. It might have been Sunday, but they say that it brings a great accession of throng and jollity. Public worship has died out at present. Work is discontinued on Sunday, but the day is given up to pleasure. Putting a minimum of indispensables into a bag, and slipping on my Hawaiian riding dress 3 over a silk skirt, and a dust cloak over all, I stealthily crossed the plaza to the livery stable, the largest building in Truckee, where 12 fine horses were stabled in stalls on each side of a broad drive. My friend of the evening before showed me his rig, 3 velvet-covered side saddles almost without horns. Some ladies, he said, use the horn of the Mexican saddle, but none in the part rode cavalier fashion. I felt abashed. I could not ride any distance in the conventional mode, and was just going to give up this splendid ravage, when the man said, "Ride your own fashion. Here, at Truckee. If anywhere in the world, people can do as they like." Blissful Truckee. In no time a large gray horse was rigged out in a handsome silver-bossed Mexican saddle, with ornamental leather tassels hanging from the stirrup guards, and a housing of black bearskin. I strapped my silk skirt on the saddle, deposited my cloak in the corn bin, and was safely on the horse's back before his owner had time to devise any way of mounting me. Neither he nor any of the loafers who had assembled showed the slightest sign of astonishment, but all were as respectful as possible. 3. For the benefit of other lady travelers, I wish to explain that my Hawaiian riding dress is the American lady's mountain dress. A half-fitting jacket, a skirt reaching to the ankles, and full Turkish trousers gathered into frills falling over the boots. A thoroughly serviceable and feminine costume for mountaineering and other rough traveling, as in the Alps or any other part of the world. I.L.B. Author's note to the second edition. November 27, 1879. Once on horseback my embarrassment disappeared, and I rode through Truckee, whose irregular, steep-roofed houses and shanties, set down in a clearing and surrounded closely by mountain and forest, looked like a temporary encampment, passed under the Pacific Railroad, and then for 12 miles followed the windings of the Truckee River, a clear, rushing, mountain stream, in which immense pine logs had gone aground, not to be floated off till the next freshet, a loud-tongued, rollicking stream of ice-cold water, on whose banks no ferns or trailers hang, and which leaves no greenness along its turbulent progress. All was bright with that brilliancy of sky and atmosphere, that blaze of sunshine and universal glitter, which I never saw till I came to California, combined with an elasticity in the air which removed all lassitude, and gives one spirit enough for anything. On either side of the Truckee Great Sierras rose like walls, castellated, embattled, rift, skirted and crowned with pines of enormous size, the walls now and then breaking apart to show some snow-slashed peak rising into a heaven of intense, unclouded, sunny blue. At this altitude of 6,000 feet, one must learn to be content with varieties of conifery. 4. Except for aspens, which spring up in some places where the pines have been cleared away, and for cottonwoods, which at a lower level fringe the streams, there is nothing but the bare cherry, the raspberry, the gooseberry, the wild grape, and the wild currant. None of these grew near the Truckee, but I feasted my eyes on pines for which, though not so large as the Wellingtonia of the Yosemite, are really gigantic, attaining a height of 250 feet, their huge stems, the warm red of cedar wood, rising straight and branchless for a third of their height, their diameter from 7 to 15 feet, their shape that of a larch, but with the needles long and dark, and cones a foot long. Pines cleft the sky. They were massed wherever level ground occurred. They stood over the Truckee at right angles, or lay across it in prostrate grandeur. Their stumps and carcasses were everywhere, and smooth chutes on the Sierras marked where they were shot down as felled timber, to be floated off by the river. To them this wild region owes its scattered population, and the sharp ring of the lumber's axe mingles with the cries of wild beasts and the roar of mountain torrents. 4. Pinus lambertina. The track is a soft, natural, wagon road, very pleasant to ride on. The horse was much too big for me, and had plans of his own, but now and then, where the ground admitted to it, I tried his heavy lope with much amusement. I met nobody, and passed nothing on the road but a freight wagon, drawn by 22 oxen, guided by 3 fine-looking men, who had some difficulty in making room for me to pass their awkward convoy. After I had ridden about 10 miles the road, went up a steep hill in the forest, turned abruptly, and through the blue gloom of the great pines which rose from the ravine in which the river was then hid, came glimpses of two mountains about 11,000 feet in height, whose bald gray summits were crowned with pure snow. It was one of those glorious surprises in scenery which make one feel as if one must bow down and worship. The forest was thick, and had an undergrowth of dwarf spruce and brambles. But as the horse had become fidgety and scary on the track, I turned off in the idea of taking a short cut, and was sitting carelessly, shortening my stirrup, when a great, dark, hairy beast rose, crashing and snorting, out of the tangle just in front of me. I had only a glimpse of him, and thought that my imagination had magnified a wild boar. But it was a bear. The horse snorted and plunged violently, as if he would go down to the river, and then turned, still plunging, up a steep bank, when, finding that I must come off, I threw myself off on the right side, where the ground rose considerably, so that I had not far to fall. I got up covered with dust, but neither shaken nor bruised. It was truly grotesque and humiliating. The bear ran in one direction,